All right, guys, we looked at immigration last unit with Irish and German immigrants. We're going to switch now to the other side of the country and look at Chinese immigrants coming into California after we have the U.S.-Mexico War and U.S. gaining that California territory. So we saw U.S.-Mexico War finish up 1848. U.S. gets California. 1849, we have gold discovered at Sutter's Mill. It's in the last lecture we have put online. And by 1850, we see Chinese immigrants coming to the United States. So we start by 1850, we have 450 Chinese immigrants coming to the U.S. By 1852, 2 years later, there's 20,000 in the country. By 1860, 35,000 in the country. By 1870, over 63,000 Chinese immigrants in the U.S. Why are they coming here? Okay, why are they coming across Pacific to California? There were actually a lot of pushing factors. One issue in China was population. Chinese population is going up, and land by family wasn't very equal. The rich in China controlled all the land. The poor had next to nothing. It was really a land of very, very rich and very, very poor. So because of that whole issue, a lot of poor peasants had two choices. Either one, you have a revolt and you try to take the government over and take the land from the aristocracy, which didn't usually go very well for them, or you leave, okay? And usually China is pretty closed about stuff. They don't let people out of their borders. They have, close everything off, not allow outsiders. They're very, very, I guess, closed door policy, if you will, to foreign involvement. England kind of forced that open in the 1840s. They have what's called the Opium War in China. So England wanted tea from China. But China's like, I'm not trading with you. So England kind of had this black market trade going on in China, trading opium that they got from the fields of Afghanistan into China for tea. China tried fighting it, hence what we call it the Opium War. As part of this whole issue that happened, England kind of forced this open door policy, and Chinese citizens were not allowed to leave the country and get out of this bad economic situation. You have a rebellion that happened at Taiping. A lot of anti-imperial societies led these insurrections, so really the empire started weakening. So more people left. And what forms is this development of something called a passage system. So pretty much this way. You people want to leave the country. You have middle-class Chinese that are kind of act as the middlemen. They kind of make this almost like indentured servitude we saw in the 1600s. You pay the middlemen, they got you over there, and you work your time off to pay off the transportation. So basically we see indentured servitude happening in California in the 1840s, 1850s. We see a second type handled at the ports where sometimes immigrants were tricked into forced labor, signing a contract that basically made them, essentially a slave. So you kind of have a version of slavery happening in California with Chinese immigrants early on out in California, but eventually laws got changed to help this out. Now, obviously, the push factor is these problems happening in China, not a lot of land, not a lot of money. Then the big pulling factor is the gold rush. A lot of people think, everyone never mine gold. What's funny is that only 400 of the first 58,000 Chinese, 58,000 miners were actually Chinese by 1850. The word wasn't that. Laborers came for other jobs that had to happen. They were talking about in the gold rush video where there's other jobs that people had to do. And so looking at the first big job, by 1870, about a quarter of the miners were Chinese. But at that time, a lot of the white miners had said, forget it, we're done with this whole gold thing. We lost all our money already. As the gold all got mined out, mining declined, a lot of Chinese went to work for the railroad. And actually, the crew that built the Transcontinental Railroad going from California out to meet the eastern branch was mostly made of Chinese workers. About 15,000 Chinese built that railroad we're talking. So it's a huge kind of deal in terms of who's out there. And so looking at the railroads, think about, the Chinese life and the Chinese workers, what happened to them. I mean, over 1,200 of those Chinese workers died avalanche and explosions. It wasn't a really huge big deal, but I mean, they were really interesting looking at some of the skills they had. When you're trying to build these railroads to the mountains, some of the Chinese were huge in doing it because they could sit in these baskets and carve these ledges so you could make the rails, lay the rails down flat and those kind of things. So, I mean, without Chinese immigrants, they would have been really screwed in terms of building that railroad. Some Chinese went to the East Coast. So some went to the east, looking at shoe factories, boot factories, those kind of things, but most still stay on the West Coast overall. So there were some treaties signed right after the Civil War happened in terms of making sure that Eastern immigration would be allowed to continue. It stops around 1882 is when it actually stops. But a lot of Chinese settled down in California as farmers. They had a lot of the peasants in China were farmers back then. They did work in planting, cultivating, harvesting. The Bing cherry is named for Ah Bing, who was a Chinese immigrant who created it. They brought a lot of new foods, that kind of stuff. We think about Chinese food, like chop suey, those kind of things. That's not really Chinese food, okay? We kind of see this Americanized Chinese food that Chinese culture brings them so that the quote unquote white people could handle it. Things like fortune cookies, that kind of stuff are invented here in the States by Chinese immigrants, those kind of things. So we see kind of this blending of Chinese and American cultures in some way. Um, we see California's population, by the 1870s, where most of the workers in the wool mills and the cigar makers are all Chinese. Um, what's funny is that most of the workers in the mill stuff are Chinese, but Chinese were never more than 1/10 of California's population, and they were made over a quarter of their workforce. There were some bad things going on early on. Attitude trainers was okay. They were hired as strike breakers sometimes because they wouldn't work for almost anything. But things did get a little more dicey with the Chinese after a while. In some cases, there are anti-Chinese organizations started formed, anti-Coolie Association. There were riots in Chinatowns from Denver and Los Angeles, and boycotts against Chinese laborers, saying don't hire these, kind of like Irish no need to apply, Chinese no need to apply kind of thing. You had a working man pamphlet. And the idea that the white freeman and his wife and children can't live in the same atmosphere as a coolie slave, so you couldn't have these interracial relationships were not seen as being appropriate. That goes up through the 1960s and 70s. I mean, out in California especially. I mean, even Bruce Lee, very famous, kung fu artist, who had Chinese heritage. He married a Caucasian woman. He was, there were some issues in the Chinese community with that. There were some questions about how he could marry a woman who wasn't Chinese as well. So kind of see their own little community, own little ethnic enclave form. There was some violence. There was some violence towards Chinese too. And in some cases, you're allowed to kill Chinese. They didn't get the best mining areas. There were a lot of massacres of Chinese, sometimes miners. Those kind of things that happen as some of these organizations form. You start seeing some legal discrimination happen as well in the West. California legislature described that Chinese were not allowed to be admitted to public schools along with African Americans and Native Americans as well. San Francisco said you could not carry a load on a pole. So a lot of times Chinese culture, you have a pole to carry loads and that kind of stuff on. You couldn't do that. So we'll have laws to kind of stop some of the Chinese culture. We see constitutions made with a lot of anti-Chinese stuff in there. I mean, eventually, 1880s, we see Chinese immigration limited with the Exclusion Act as well. It gets passed in 1882. There's some other violent stuff that happened too. It's in your textbook. So here's a little overview of Chinese immigration, where I'm asking you guys to compare this in Schoology to the immigrants from Germany and Ireland. Make sure to take care of that for me. Thanks a lot.